Hello and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will be looking into the last meals of inmates who were executed in the United States. Today's video will be based in the state of Alabama. Christopher Price.
Now, Thursday, the state of Alabama is set to execute a convicted killer. Christopher Lee Price avoided being put to death last month when the Supreme Court couldn't reach a decision in time on how he should die. Price said he wanted nitrogen, which is less painful than a lethal injection. The High Court took up that case and ruled the execution should go ahead using the lethal injection. But the execution warrant expired by the time they made that decision. Price was convicted of killing a pastor with a sword and a dagger back in 1991.
Christopher Price was sentenced to death in 1991 for killing of Pastor William Lynn. His initial execution was scheduled on the 11th of April, 2019, but a stay of execution was issued by the judge. Even though the state of Alabama appealed the stay, it was eventually given by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The state called off the execution at 11:40 p.m. that night, and 2 hours later it was granted by the Supreme Court. A couple of days before his execution, Price's lawyers said in an interview that they thought Alabama's choice of execution method was inhumane. Nonetheless, Price was executed by lethal injection on the 30th of May, 2019, after being on death row for almost 30 years. Price was the second inmate to be executed in a 2-week time frame. His last meal was 4 pints of turtle pie ice cream. Jack Harrison Trawick. Jack Harrison Trawick was sentenced to death for the murder of Stephanie Gatch in October 1992. He was also convicted of killing Eileen Pruitt in June 1992, but he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Trawick also confessed to several other killings, bringing his total between 5 and 14 women ranging from the years 1972 to 1992. Trawick went on trial for Gatch's murder in 1994. Under Alabama's state law, any crime that is a capital murder automatically carries the death penalty. After 1 hour and 40 minutes of deliberation, he was handed the sentence. He appealed his death sentence 3 times, and all 3 times were rejected, with the last appeal being in 2008, a few months before he was put to death. Jack Trawick was executed by lethal injection on the 11th of June, 2009. He was overall the 19th inmate to be executed by the method. His last meal included fried chicken, French fries, onion soup, and a roll. John Louis Evans. John Louis Evans was sentenced to death in January 1977 murder of pawnshop owner Edward Nassar. Fellow convict Wayne Ritter were both given the capital punishment after the prosecutors refused to accept the guilty plea because they wanted Nassar and Ritter to receive the death penalty in April 1977. Under Alabama's law, once an inmate has received the death penalty, it goes into a review with the higher court to be approved. The death sentence was finally approved on the 6th of April, 1979 by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and by the Alabama Supreme Court. Evans appealed his death sentence in July 1982, and the motion was accepted to be reviewed in October 1982. However, a couple of months later, in February 1983, Alabama Supreme Court rejected his appeal and the date of execution was given. John Louis Evans was executed on the 22nd of April, 1983 by the electric chair, which hadn't been used since 1965, and his execution was classed as a botched one. I will spare you the details of why it was botched. Please feel free to research that yourself. It took them 3 jolts of electricity for execute Evans. His accomplice Wayne Ritter was also executed by electrocution on the 28th of August, 1987. His last meal was a shrimp dinner. Walter Moody. Walter Moody was sentenced to death for the 1989 letter bombing of United States federal judge Robert Vance. Moody was also convicted for the bombing of civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson at the same time. Moody went on trial in 1997 for both bombings and was handed 7 life sentences for his crimes and the death sentence for Vance's death on the 13th of February, 1997. On the 23rd of February, 2018, an execution date was set on the 19th of April, 2018. Walter Moody was executed by lethal injection on this date. He was the oldest inmate to be executed in the United States at the age of 83 years and 26 days, passing the previous record that was set by Mississippi inmate John B. Nixon Sr., who was executed in December 2005 at the age of 77 years, 8 months, and 13 days. Moody declined a special meal, but shared 2 Philly cheesesteak sandwiches, a bag of chips, 2 bottles of Dr. Pepper, 1 bag of M&Ms and an almond Hershey bar with 2 attorneys and 3 friends before the execution, so this was classed as a last meal as it wasn't the normal meal the inmates would have not been given. Billy Wayne Waldrop. Billy Wayne Waldrop was sentenced to death for the 1982 killing of Thurman Macon Donahue. Waldrop was originally sentenced for 2 murders in 1973 and almost received the death sentence, but he tried to take his own life, and his lawyers negotiated a plea deal with prosecutors so he avoided them. Instead, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for each count. After serving 7.5 years of his original 15-year sentence, Waldrop was released on 3 January, 1981. Waldrop and 2 other accomplices committed the 3rd murder in July 1982. Donahue's burned body was found in the charred ruins of his 100-year-old home after a robbery and arson in which $130 and a 5-carat diamond ring were stolen. He was fatally shot in the head before the fire was set. He was sentenced to death for the robbery, arson, and murder on the 22nd of March, 1983. He appealed his death sentence 5 times, once in 1983, 1985, 1987, 1994 and lastly 1996. After all the appeals were exhausted, he was eventually given the date of his execution. Waldrop was executed by electrocution on 10 January, 1997. Whilst he was strapped to the chair, he started singing Amazing Grace. His last meal included steak, onions, and baked potato, salad and chocolate cake. Carey Dale Grayson.
Today, the state of Alabama will carry out the nation's 3rd nitrogen gas execution. The execution window for Carey Grayson opened at midnight and it expires tomorrow morning at 6.
And Grayson will be put to death for the murder of a woman in Jefferson County in the 90s. Several lawsuits have been filed over recent months challenging his chosen method of execution, calling it inhumane. However, the state says the method has been tested and certain symptoms are now expected during these deaths. Grayson's team says they are filing last-minute appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it's unclear what's been decided.
Well, let's take a look at the timeline of events in the tragic killing of Vicki DeBlow. We want to warn you that some of the details of this story are graphic. Now, back in February of 1994, Vicki was hitchhiking to her mother's house in Louisiana. She was picked up by 4 teenagers near the Trussville exit on I-59. Then they drove her into the woods where they threw beer bottles at her and then beat her to death. The teens then drove off to Bald Rock Mountain where they threw her body off of a cliff. The next morning, the teens went back, they found her body and mutilated it. The coroner says that every bone in her skull was fractured, her left lung was gone, and all of her fingers were cut off.
And all 4 of the teens were found guilty of murder. Luis Mangione was just 16 at the time he was given life in prison. 17-year-old Kenny Loggins and Trace Duncan were sentenced to death, but would later be changed to life since they were under the age of 18 at the time of the killing. Now, Grayson, who's set to be put to death this evening, was 19 at the time of the killing.
Carey Dale Grayson was executed by nitrogen hypoxia on the 21st of November, 2024. His last meal included soft tacos, beef burritos, a tostada, chips and guacamole, and a Mountain Dew Barger Blast. James Hubbard. James Hubbard was sentenced to death for the killing of 62-year-old Lillian Montgomery in January 1977. In 1957, Hubbard was convicted of the killing of David Dockery and was given a 50-year prison sentence after the plea of self-defense was rejected. He was released on parole 19 years later and went to live with Montgomery, who made friends with Hubbard and sponsored Hubbard to make sure he was released. Lillian was shot 3 times by Hubbard after a night of heavy drinking in January 1977. He was arrested, convicted, and given the death penalty in the same year. James Hubbard was executed by lethal injection on 5 August, 2004 at the age of 74, making him the oldest inmate to be executed at the time since the death penalty was reinstated. His last meal included 2 fried eggs over medium, 4 slices of bacon, sliced tomatoes, fried green tomatoes, pineapple slices with mayonnaise, white bread, a banana, and a medium-sized bottle of V8 juice. Thanks again for watching. Please leave me a comment on what state you want me to visit next. Make sure to stick around the next installment. This is True Crime with Chess.